Hi, I'm Randy Maxey with Infinity Cutting Tools, and today I want to tell you a little bit about this project we're going to build, and it's a saw blade storage cabinet. It's a nice accessory to have beside your table saw or near your table saw. I've got a little tray up here that stores all my table saw accessories. I've got these plastic trays that store all of my saw blades and keep them organized and protected. And finally, I've got a wood storage box down here that keeps my dado blade stack organized and protected and handy. So today we're going to step into the shop and I'm going to show you how we put this thing together. Now the material I'm using for this project is Baltic birch plywood. I like it because it's flat and stable and it has very few voids in it when you cut into it. Now before we get started, what I like to do is I like to cut my work pieces down to a rough size first, and then I'll go back later and trim them to final size. Now before I do that, I want to show you a little bit about my table saw setup. The blade I'm using is an 80-tooth ultra smooth blade by Infinity Cutting Tools. The stock guides I'm using are made by Jessam, and I like to use these because they help hold the workpiece down to the table and up against the fence as I'm making a rip cut. So before I get started, I'm going to call in a little help because this is a big sheet of plywood, so I'm going to get Andrew to come in and help me make that first cut to cut the workpiece down to rough size first. Now that I've got my workpiece cut to rough size, I'm going to go ahead and rip both edges clean so I've got a nice straight edge to work with. And then I'm going to come back and cross cut those pieces to final length to make the sides, the top, and bottom of the cabinet. Now that I've got my workpiece trimmed to width, it's time to cross-cut the individual pieces to their final length. For that, I'm using the Incra Miter 1000 HD miter gauge. It's super accurate, so I know I'm going to get square cuts out of it. Now to set the length of my cuts, I'm using a stop block up against my rip fence. The distance between the stop block and the blade equals the length of the top and bottom of my case. After I get those two pieces cut, I'm going to go back and readjust it to cut the sides of my case. But before I do any of that, I'm going to trim the end of my workpiece so that I've got a nice clean square edge before I cut my workpiece to length. We're here at the table saw again to cut the dados in the sides of my case pieces. Those dados, a series of dados up and down the sides of the case, are going to act as slots to hold these blade protectors that'll kind of serve as drawers for my saw blades. So I've got a dado stack installed. It's a 5/8 inch width dado, and I'm going to use my rip fence as a gauge to locate each of the dados. Okay, all my pieces are cut. I've got my dadoes cut in my sides. So now I've got a sacrificial fence set up on my table saw using the same dado stack that I used for the dadoes. So what I'm going to do now is cut a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch rabbet on the back edges of 2 of my sides and the top piece for the 1/2 inch thick cabinet back. Okay, now I'm back at the router table. I'm going to use the Infinity lapped miter bit set to create the joinery for the case sides and the top and bottom. I've got all my pieces cut now, so what I've done is I've taped a straight edge down to my bench, and I've laid all the case pieces inside face down against the straight edge so that I could keep them all straight and flush. I've got them arranged from the bottom, one side, the top, and then the opposite side. And then I've used some blue painter's tape to tape those joints nice and tight, stretching the tape across the joint to draw those pieces together. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this whole assembly over, apply glue, and then bring them together and tape it while the glue dries, and then apply the back. One more step. Perfect. I've added 2 shelves here. Because I've used 5/8 inch wide dadoes and I'm using 3/4 inch material, I had to cut a little rabbet in the shelf to form a tongue to fit inside that dado. So I did that at the top and bottom. I've got my case all assembled now, and you'll notice that I've got an opening at the top. So I made this little tray that holds all of my table saw accessories, so I can slide that in place now. And then I've got my plastic blade protectors that slide in the dados that I made in the case. I could slide all my blades and store all my blades in there. And then the bottom openings for a box that I'm using to hold my dado stack. I've gone ahead and added a couple runners on the side to kind of keep the box centered, and there's a stop in the back that allows the box to project just enough that I can grab it and pull it out and use it. So now you've got a complete assembly that you can use to store your saw blades and all your table saw accessories. If you'd like to build your own version of this saw blade storage cabinet, go to our blog and you'll find an overview of how I went about building this cabinet. And then you can also find and download a PDF, measured drawings, and also a 3D SketchUp model of the cabinet that you can use and modify to suit your needs.